Her eyes bulged with rage, face twisted in a malicious sneer. Your son's hoodie is an outrage. His father's a Supreme Court justice. This won't be tolerated. Karen's shrill screams pierced the quiet neighborhood, igniting a volatile confrontation that would shatter the lives of all involved. Karen's fists clenched as she glared at the teenager, shuffling uncomfortably on his front lawn. That hoodie is a disgrace. Your father may sit on the highest court, but that doesn't give you the right to flaunt your privilege in this neighborhood. The boy, Ethan, tried to interject, but Karen's relentless tirade showed no signs of stopping. I've had enough of your family's elitism. You think you can do whatever you want, just because your daddy wears a robe to work. Ethan's father, Justice William Harrington, emerged from the house, face etched with concern. Karen, please, let's discuss this calmly. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a gesture of support that only seemed to enrage the irate woman further. Calm. How can I be calm when your son is mocking us all with that outrageous hoodie? Karen stabbed an accusatory finger at the plain black fabric. It's an insult to every hard-working family in this community. William tried to reason with her, but Karen refused to listen. This isn't about a hoodie, and you know it. It's about your family's sense of entitlement, your willingness to trample on the rest of us. Ethan watched helplessly as the confrontation escalated, his father's attempts at diplomacy falling on deaf ears. He knew his mother's uncompromising nature all too well, and he braced himself for the inevitable fallout. If you don't put a stop to this behavior immediately, I'll have no choice but to take legal action, Karen threatened, her voice dripping with venom. Your son's disrespect won't be tolerated, not in my neighborhood. William's brow furrowed, his typically calm demeanor slipping. Are you really threatening my family, Karen? Over a hoodie? I'm not the one who started this, Karen retorted, her eyes narrowing. Your son needs to learn some humility, and if you won't teach him, then I'll make sure the entire community does. Ethan felt his heart race as the tension reached a fever pitch. He knew his family's status would only make them a bigger target, and he feared what Karen's next move might be. As the confrontation drew to a close, Karen stormed off, her parting words echoing through the silent street. This isn't over, Harrington. Not by a long shot. Ethan watched her go, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. He turned to his father, his voice barely above a whisper. What are we going to do? William's expression was grim, his mind already racing to anticipate Karen's next actions. I don't know, son, but I promised you we'll get through this, as a family. The Harrington household now found itself at the center of a rapidly escalating conflict, one that threatened to expose the family's private life to the entire community. Ethan braced himself for the storm to come, knowing that his father's position would only make them a more enticing target for Karen's relentless crusade. The next morning, Ethan's routine was disrupted by a commotion in the front yard. Peering through the window, he saw that Karen had gathered a group of neighbors, each holding a sign with slogans condemning the Harrington family. Privileged elites. One sign read, "Justice for the community, not the courtroom," proclaimed another. Ethan's heart sank as he watched the protest unfold. Karen had wasted no time in rallying the neighborhood against his family, exploiting their resentment towards the Harringtons' perceived status and influence. Dread filling his stomach, Ethan hurried to the front door, where his father was already attempting to reason with the angry crowd. Please, everyone, let's talk about this rationally, William pleaded, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. There's no need for this kind of confrontation. Karen's piercing voice cut through the din. No need? Your son's disrespect is an affront to all of us. We won't stand for your family's arrogance any longer. The protesters erupted in shouts of agreement, shaking their signs and chanting slogans. Ethan felt his face flush with embarrassment and anger. How dare they target his family this way? Stepping forward, Ethan tried to interject, but his voice was drowned out by the crowd's fevered chanting. Frustrated, he turned to his father, silently begging him to take control of the situation. William, sensing his son's distress, raised his hands again, trying to restore order. "Everyone, please. I understand your concerns, but this is not the way to address them. Let's sit down and have a calm, rational discussion." Karen scoffed, her expression one of pure disdain. "Calm discussion? You think we haven't tried that already? No, it's time for action, and we won't stop until your family learns its place." The protesters roared their approval, and Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. It was clear that Karen had whipped them into a frenzy, and there was no reasoning with them now. As the protest continued, Ethan noticed his mother, Rebecca, emerge from the house, her face etched with worry. She hurried to William's side, placing a hand on his arm and speaking in a hushed tone. Ethan watched as his parents conferred, their expressions grave. He knew they were weighing their options, trying to find a way to diffuse the situation without further inflaming the already volatile crowd. Finally, William turned to the protesters, his voice firm and unwavering. "If you continue this harassment, I will have no choice but to take legal action. I urge you all to reconsider your actions and return to your homes." Karen's eyes narrowed, a malicious smile spreading across her face. "Legal action? You think that scares us, Justice Harrington? We're not going anywhere until you and your family learn your lesson." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Ethan felt a sense of dread wash over him. He knew that his family was now trapped in a high-stakes battle, one that threatened to tear the entire community apart. As the protesters continued their chants and the tension in the air thickened, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would his family be able to withstand the onslaught of Karen's relentless crusade? Or would they be forced to pay a devastating price for their perceived privilege? The following days brought no respite for the Harrington family. Karen's protest had only been the beginning of a relentless campaign to undermine their standing in the community. Ethan watched helplessly as his parents received a steady stream of threatening letters and phone calls, each one more menacing than the last. Neighbors who had once been friendly now averted their gaze or hurled insults when the Harringtons ventured out. William had attempted to reason with Karen and her allies, but his appeals for calm and civility fell on deaf ears. The protesters remained a constant presence outside the family's home, their chants and signs a constant reminder of the battle they were forced to fight. Tensions reached a boiling point when a group of the protesters vandalized the Harringtons' property, spray painting slogans on the walls and slashing the tires of their vehicles. Ethan's mother, Rebecca, had been devastated by the brazen act of retaliation, her eyes brimming with tears as she surveyed the damage. William, his usually stoic demeanor crumbling, had immediately called the police, demanding that the perpetrators be held accountable. But to the family's dismay, the authorities seemed unwilling to intervene, citing concerns about the growing unrest in the community. Ethan watched as his parents struggled to navigate the increasingly hostile environment, their once peaceful neighborhood now a battleground. He could see the toll it was taking on them, the worry and exhaustion etched into their faces. As the days turned into weeks, the family's isolation only deepened. Ethan's friends, once eager to hang out, now avoided him, their parents warning them against associating with the privileged Harringtons. The teenager felt his world shrinking, the very community he had grown up in now rejecting him and his family. One evening, as the family sat in somber silence, Ethan's father made a startling announcement. "I'm going to resign from the Supreme Court." Ethan and Rebecca both stared at William, their eyes wide with shock. "What? You can't be serious," Rebecca breathed, her voice trembling. William nodded, his expression grave. "I don't see any other choice. As long as I remain a Supreme Court justice, this harassment will only continue. I need to protect my family." Ethan felt a wave of anguish wash over him. His father's position on the highest court had always been a source of pride, a testament to the family's accomplishments, and now it was being sacrificed in a desperate attempt to appease their tormentors. "But Dad, you can't just give in to them," Ethan protested, his voice thick with emotion. "That's what they want, to break us down and force us to submit." William reached across the table, grasping his son's hand. "I know, son. Believe me, I don't want to do this. But I can't stand by and watch our family be torn apart. I have to protect you and your mother." Ethan felt the weight of his father's words, the heavy burden of responsibility that now rested on his shoulders. He knew that this decision would have far-reaching consequences, not just for their family, but for the entire legal system. As the Harringtons grappled with this latest development, Ethan couldn't help but wonder how much more they would be forced to sacrifice before this ordeal finally came to an end. The news of Justice Harrington's impending resignation sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. The media descended on the quiet neighborhood, eager to report on the dramatic clash between the esteemed jurist and the seemingly ordinary citizens who had taken up arms against him. Karen and her allies were emboldened by the Harringtons' decision, their chants and protests growing even more fervent. They saw William's resignation as a victory, a concession to their demands for justice and accountability. Ethan watched helplessly as the family's private struggle was thrust into the public spotlight. His peers at school, once friendly and supportive, now eyed him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, unsure of how to interact with the son of a man they had been conditioned to view as an adversary. As the pressure mounted, the Harringtons found themselves increasingly isolated, their once vibrant social connections severed by the divisive nature of the conflict. Ethan's friends, fearful of the backlash, distanced themselves, leaving the teenager to navigate the hostile environment alone. In the face of this relentless onslaught, William and Rebecca made the difficult decision to withdraw Ethan from the local school, opting for private tutoring to shield him from the growing animosity. The teenager protested, arguing that he should not be the one to suffer the consequences of their family's ordeal, but his parents remained steadfast in their decision. "We're doing this to protect you, Ethan," Rebecca said, her voice tinged with guilt and concern. "We can't risk you being caught in the crossfire of this conflict. It's simply not safe for you to remain in that environment." Ethan reluctantly acquiesced, understanding the gravity of the situation, but the move only further reinforced his sense of isolation and displacement. He felt like a stranger in his own community, a pariah whose very existence had become a source of controversy and division. As the weeks passed, the Harrington family found themselves the subject of relentless media scrutiny, their every move and statement dissected and analyzed. Karen and her supporters seized upon this attention, using it to amplify their message and rally even more supporters to their cause. Ethan watched in horror as his family's private life became a public spectacle, their personal struggles transformed into a political battleground. He knew that his father's resignation would not be enough to appease the insatiable demands of their tormentors, and he feared that the worst was yet to come. The tension in the neighborhood reached a fever pitch when it was reported that the Harringtons were considering selling their home and relocating to a new community. This news only fueled the protesters' outrage, with Karen declaring that the family's cowardly retreat would not be tolerated. Ethan felt a growing sense of despair as he witnessed the unraveling of the life he had once known. The idyllic suburban existence he had taken for granted had been shattered, replaced by a reality of fear, isolation, and relentless public scrutiny. As the family huddled together, grappling with the weight of their decision, Ethan couldn't help but wonder how much more they would be forced to sacrifice before this ordeal finally came to an end. The Harrington family's decision to sell their home and relocate had only served to further inflame the tensions within the community. Karen and her supporters were outraged, seeing the move as a cowardly attempt to escape the consequences of their actions. Ethan watched in dismay as the protesters redoubled their efforts, staging increasingly confrontational demonstrations and flooding the local media with scathing criticism of the family's decision. The once quiet neighborhood had become a battleground, with the Harringtons caught in the center of the maelstrom. As the family prepared to put their home on the market, they faced a new obstacle. Their real estate agent, a longtime resident of the community, had refused to represent them. citing concerns about the potential backlash and the damage the Harringtons' presence had done to the neighborhood. The agent made it clear that she wanted no part in facilitating their departure. Stunned by this betrayal, William and Rebecca scrambled to find an alternative, eventually enlisting the help of a realtor from a neighboring town. But even this proved to be a challenge, as the new agent faced intense pressure from Karen and her allies to withdraw from the listing. Ethan could see the toll this ordeal was taking on his parents. Their once unwavering composure had begun to crack, and he could sense the growing desperation in their actions. They were running out of options, trapped in a vicious cycle of harassment and retaliation. As the family's plans to sell their home became public knowledge, the protesters escalated their tactics. They began showing up at open houses, disrupting viewings, and intimidating potential buyers. Ethan's heart sank as he watched prospective owners flee, unable to stomach the hostile environment. In a final, desperate attempt to salvage the sale, the Harringtons turned to the courts, filing a lawsuit against the real estate agent who had refused to represent them. But even this move was met with staunch opposition from Karen and her supporters, who flooded the legal system with their own filings and motions. The battle had become a war of attrition, with both sides refusing to back down. Ethan could see the toll it was taking on his parents, their once vibrant spirits gradually fading as they faced one obstacle after another. As the weeks turned into months, the Harrington family's hopes of a clean, uneventful sale began to dwindle. The protesters remained a constant presence, their chants and signs a daily reminder of the hostility that had enveloped their lives. Ethan found himself increasingly withdrawn, retreating into a world of his own as he struggled to cope with the relentless stress and upheaval. He longed for the days when his family had been free to live their lives without the glare of public scrutiny and the ever-present threat of retaliation. As the family's legal battles dragged on, Ethan could sense a growing sense of desperation within his parents. They had exhausted every avenue, and yet the end seemed nowhere in sight. He knew that they were running out of options, and the thought of what that might mean for their future filled him with a deep, unsettling dread. The Harrington family's desperate attempts to sell their home and escape the relentless harassment from Karen and her supporters had reached a critical juncture. After months of legal battles and failed real estate transactions, they were running out of options. Ethan watched helplessly as his parents, once the picture of composure and confidence, began to crumble under the weight of the ordeal. The constant stress and public scrutiny had taken a heavy toll, and the family's once tight-knit bond was beginning to fray. In a last-ditch effort to regain control of the situation, William decided to take matters into his own hands. He arranged a private meeting with Karen, hoping to appeal to her sense of reason and find a way to end the conflict. But as Ethan listened to his father's description of the encounter, it became clear that Karen was unwilling to compromise. She had made it abundantly clear that the Harringtons' departure from the community was the only acceptable outcome, and she would stop at nothing to ensure it. Dejected and weary, William returned home, his shoulders slumped with the weight of his failure. Ethan could see the despair etched into his father's features, and he felt a deep sense of helplessness wash over him. As the family sat in somber silence, Rebecca finally spoke up, her voice trembling with emotion. "I think it's time we consider the unthinkable," she said, her gaze meeting William's. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what his mother was implying. "You can't mean," he started, but the words caught in his throat. William nodded, his expression grave. "I'm afraid we have no other choice, son. We've exhausted every avenue, and the harassment shows no signs of stopping. We have to protect ourselves, even if it means taking the most drastic measure." Ethan's mind raced as he grappled with the implications of his parents' decision. They were considering leaving the community altogether, abandoning the life they had built and the home they had cherished. It was a choice born out of desperation, a last-ditch effort to reclaim their freedom and their safety. As the family discussed the logistics of their potential escape, Ethan felt a mix of emotions: relief that the ordeal might finally come to an end, but also a deep sense of loss and displacement. This community had been his home, the place where he had grown up and formed the connections that had shaped his identity. The thought of leaving it all behind, of starting anew in an unfamiliar place, filled him with a profound sense of unease. But as he watched his parents' weathered faces, he knew that they had no other choice. Their safety, and perhaps even their lives, were at stake. With a heavy heart, Ethan agreed to support his parents' decision, knowing that the road ahead would be fraught with uncertainty and upheaval. The family that had once been the pride of the community was now forced to flee, their lives upended by the relentless pursuit of a single woman's obsession. As they began to plan their departure, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would they be able to find the peace and security they so desperately craved, or would they forever be haunted by the legacy of this bitter conflict? The Harrington family's decision to leave their home and community behind was not one they had made lightly. As they prepared to embark on this new chapter, they were acutely aware of the sacrifices they would be forced to make. Ethan watched with a heavy heart as his parents meticulously sorted through their belongings, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. Every item they packed away held a lifetime of memories, a reminder of the life they were being forced to abandon. The family's once vibrant home now felt like a hollow shell. The warmth and comfort that had once defined it stripped away by the relentless onslaught of Karen's campaign. Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of deep sorrow as he surveyed the empty rooms, knowing that he would never again step foot in the place he had called home. As the moving trucks arrived to transport their belongings to their new, undisclosed location, Ethan felt a pang of grief wash over him. He had grown up in this community, forged friendships and memories that had been the foundation of his life. And now, he was being forced to leave it all behind, a victim of a conflict he never asked to be a part of. William and Rebecca, sensing their son's distress, drew him into a tight embrace. "We know this is hard, Ethan," his mother murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "But we have to do this. We have to protect our family." Ethan nodded, his throat constricted with unshed tears. He understood the necessity of their decision, but that didn't make it any easier to bear. The thought of starting over in an unknown place, of having to rebuild his life from scratch, filled him with a sense of dread. As the last of their belongings were loaded onto the trucks, the family took one final, lingering look at the house they were leaving behind. Ethan could see the pain and regret etched into his parents' faces, and he knew that this was a wound that would never fully heal. With a deep, steadying breath, they turned and climbed into the waiting car, leaving the life they had known behind. Ethan stared out the window, watching as the familiar neighborhood faded into the distance, replaced by the unfamiliar streets of their new temporary home. The journey was a silent one, the only sound the hum of the car's engine and the occasional sniffle from Rebecca. Ethan felt as if a piece of himself had been torn away, the foundation of his identity shaken to its core. As they pulled into the driveway of their new residence, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation. This place was foreign, devoid of the warmth and familiarity that had once defined his world. He knew that the road ahead would be a long and arduous one, filled with the challenge of rebuilding and reclaiming a sense of belonging. But even as Ethan grappled with these weighty emotions, he could see the determination in his parents' eyes. They had sacrificed so much to protect their family, and they were not about to let Karen's relentless crusade destroy everything they had worked for. With a newfound resolve, the Harringtons stepped out of the car, ready to face the uncertain future that lay before them. As the Harrington family settled into their new, anonymous home, a sense of unease and displacement lingered in the air. Ethan found himself struggling to adjust to the unfamiliar surroundings, the absence of the familiar landmarks and comforts of his childhood weighing heavily on his mind. William and Rebecca, too, were grappling with profound changes in their lives. The sacrifices they had made to protect their family had come at a great personal cost, and the sense of loss they felt was palpable. Yet, even in the midst of this upheaval, a glimmer of hope began to emerge. Ethan, taking his cue from his parents' unwavering resilience, gradually began to explore his new environment. tentatively forging connections with his neighbors and seeking out opportunities to reclaim a sense of normalcy. Meanwhile, William and Rebecca worked tirelessly to secure their family's future, drawing upon their vast network of professional and personal contacts to pave the way for a new chapter. They knew that the battle with Karen and her supporters was far from over, but they were determined to confront the challenge head-on, no longer willing to be cowed by the relentless onslaught. As the weeks turned into months, the Harringtons began to regain a semblance of stability and security. Ethan enrolled in a new school, where he found solace in the company of classmates who were unaware of the family's tumultuous past. Slowly but surely, he began to rebuild his sense of self, no longer defined solely by the conflict that had appended his life. William, in a surprising turn of events, was approached by a prestigious law firm who offered him a prestigious position that would allow him to continue his legal work while providing the family with the financial stability they so desperately needed. Eager to leave his Supreme Court resignation behind, he readily accepted the offer, his sense of purpose and professional identity restored. Rebecca, too, found her footing, immersing herself in volunteer work and community outreach efforts that allowed her to channel her energy into positive endeavors. The family's newfound sense of purpose and direction helped to ease the burden of their forced relocation, and they began to envision a future that was not solely defined by the past. Yet, even as the Harringtons settled into their new life, they remained acutely aware of the unfinished business that lingered in the shadows. Karen and her supporters had not relented in their crusade, and the family knew that the conflict would likely continue to cast a long shadow over their lives. One day, as Ethan was walking home from school, he stumbled upon a familiar sight: a small group of protesters, their signs bearing the same slogans and accusations that had once tormented his family. Instinctively, he froze, his heart pounding with a familiar sense of dread. But then, something changed. Ethan felt a surge of defiance, a determination to no longer be defined by the actions of others. With a resolute step, he continued on his way, refusing to let the protesters' presence dictate his path. As he approached his new home, Ethan realized that while the scars of the past would never fully heal, the Harringtons had emerged from the ordeal stronger, more resilient, and more united than ever before. They had weathered the storm, and though the future remained uncertain, they were ready to face it head-on, united in their resolve to reclaim their lives and their sense of belonging.